Alright, let's get into how we do a Pearson Square. Pearson Square is going to be one of the easiest methods of ration formulation we learn. It's simple, it's fast, and actually extremely practical. We were figuring out something for the swine unit the other day, and this was the fastest, easiest way for us to balance the ration real quick. And so it's something we use all the time. It's great with 2 ingredients. If you're going to be a high school ag teacher or working with 4-H and FFA kids, this is a great way to teach them about how to figure out how much grain and hay to give an animal and to figure out some of those 2 ingredient types of diets. And the Pearson Square is best learned through examples. There's a support article online. Make sure you grab that, and we'll be working through some of that. But it's really simply learn it with examples, and we're going to work through a couple right now. The first scenario, so we've got a group of pigs that have that need 18% protein on a dry matter basis. We've got corn and soybean meal available to us to use. So the first thing is just making sure we get all of our information that we need. And the first thing we need is the nutrient requirement for the animal. In this case, that nutrient requirement is given to us. They need 18% crude protein. The second thing that we need to get is the feeds available to us. And we're using 2 feeds, and this one is also a given. And we have corn grain and soybean meal. So we have our 2 feeds, we have our compositional data within that. So we're going to be able to solve this problem. So just reiterating that our requirement's 18% and we've got corn and soybean meal to work with. So let's set up a whiteboard here and let's go ahead and take a look at how we do that. Actually, just to be different, we're going to use a chalkboard today just because it looks cool and I'm going to mess around with that. So we will work with some pretty colored chalk. I make enough of these videos, you guys have to work with me a little bit if I get a little rummy on them. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a square. Eventually you're going to get to where you don't need to draw a square. It's not a very good square and it does not have to be a perfect square. The first thing we do is we put the nutrient requirement in the center of the square. So step 1 is the square with the requirement. That's what we're going to do. Next, we're going to take our 2 feeds. So we've got corn. Whoops. Shoot. Sorry, I hit a wrong button. We have corn and soybean meal. And we're going to put the nutrient composition data on a dry matter basis next to those 2. So we've got corn was 10% protein, soybean meal was 50%. Okay? And we leave these numbers whole. So we don't have to worry about moving a decimal or anything. That's the beauty of a Pearson Square. So for the second part, we're going to put up the feed composition data and get that done. Third step that we're going to do is where it gets a little bit strange is we are going to subtract diagonally. Okay? We just want absolute numbers. Okay? We don't care about negative signs or diagonally. Sorry, I can't spell. And so when we do this and subtract diagonally, the difference between 10 and 18 is 8. And the difference between 50 and 18 is 32. Okay? We have essentially just roughly solved this. That's how many parts of the ration is going to be corn and soybean meal. Then once we do that, the next step is to total them up. So 32 plus 8 is 40. So we're going to total the parts. Now we can figure out the percent of each ingredient just by using that same formula we used before. What is a percentage? It's the part divided by the whole times 100. So in this case, we're going to take the 32 parts divided by 40 parts, okay? So right here and right here, times 100. And that gives us 80.0, wow. Sorry I hit that little arrow button on my software. 80%. If we do the same thing with the second line, we're going to take the 8 divided by 40 times 100, and we get 20.00%. These add up to 100%. And because we started off with our requirement in a dry matter basis and our percentages in a dry matter basis, we have just solved our first Pearson square. The only quirky thing when we read a Pearson square is that we read it going across. So what this really means is that our final ration, corn, is 80%, soybean meal is 20% on a dry matter basis. Sorry. That's a Pearson square. It's pretty straightforward. It's just making sure you remember those steps and just knowing what a percentage is. That's all we're doing. So let's bounce out of this real quick and go back. We did this first example. Let's try a second one. So our second scenario is where we're balancing a ration for the growing beef heifer that needs 62% TDN using corn silage and grass hay. So our requirement 62%, and that is on a dry matter basis, so making sure our two feeds that we have available, corn silage and grass hay, they're both on a dry matter basis. Now on this one, notice that I'm asking you to convert the final formula to an as-fed formula. We want to know how much to feed the cow. And that's going to be a standard operating procedure for most of our problems. Okay, especially when we're feeding herbivores. So let's take a look at how we would do that. Oops, sorry, let me get rid of my drawing side of it. So we're going to set up our square again, just like we did last time. We have our square, and our heifer required 62% TDN. So we put that in the center square. Okay, we're going to take our two feeds, and we had corn silage, which was 70% TDN, and we had our grass hay, which was 55% TDN. We're going to subtract diagonally. And remember, we don't care about decimal forms or anything that. So the difference between 62 and 55 is 7. The difference between 70 and 62 is 8. We have a total of 15 parts. 8 parts and 7 parts. So now we're able to calculate our percentages. And the percentages are just like we did before. 7 divided by 15 times 100 gives us, for this problem, 46.67%. Remember to carry the 2 decimals. 8 divided by 15 times 100 gives us 53.33%. So what we find out is that this diet, because remember if we read across, has 46.67% silage, and this diet has 53.33% hay. The last step of this is we still have one more step, converting to an as-fed formula. So let me go ahead and bounce over to a new screen here to kind of walk you through this process. So if we have our corn silage, and that was 46 0.67%, or we could say pounds of dry matter. And we had our grass hay. My handwriting is hard on this. Just so you guys know, it is hard to write on this iPad. My grass hay is 53.33 pounds of dry matter for 100 pounds of dry matter. We want to convert it to an as-fed formula, so it's very similar to finding out when we've had to find out that dry matter of the mix. We're doing the same thing. So we want to solve for pounds as fed. So what we're going to do is divide these by their percent dry matter. If you look up in the feed composition data, you find out, let me put a decimal here, that's a decimal, that the, make sure that's easier to read, that the corn silage is 30% dry matter and the grass hay is 90. So if we divide both of these by those two numbers, we need 155.57. Dang it. Sorry it's doing that. I seem to be hitting the next slide button, and that's not going over well. But we need 155.57. I'll write that in really carefully there. And we need 59.26 pounds as fed. So if you think about it, if this is our dry matter number, we're dividing by our dry matter constant percentages to add the water back in. So it makes sense that when we total these up, we actually need 214.83 pounds as fed to meet this 100 pounds dry matter requirement. And so now we have our new amounts as fed, but we want this on a percentage basis. So when I say in the homeworks, convert the dry matter formula, that's the dry matter percentages, to an as fed formula, we want to solve for percentages. So to convert these to percentages, what we're going to do is take the part over the whole. In this case, here's our part and here's our whole. So for corn silage, we know we need 155.57 pounds of corn silage, and the total diet is 214.83. What is that times 100? That gives us 72.42%. If we do the same thing for the grass hay, where we've got 59.26 divided by the 214.83 times 100, we come up with 27.57%. And notice these percentages differ quite a bit from our original ones that we had, and it's all because that corn silage is such a high moisture feed, it drastically changes that as fed formula, which is why in the herbivores we really want to make sure that we convert to an as fed so that the rancher knows what he needs. If somebody was mixing this ration, he would know what they need to put in that feed mixer to be able to make it go. And that would be the final answer for this problem. We've got a couple practice rations for you to do. You can pause this video right now and take a stab at doing the Pearson Square yourself for these two things and give it a shot. And what we'll wind up doing is there's a solution that'll be coming up on the next slide. So pause it, practice these, and then take a look at the solutions and see if you got it right. Neither one of these asks you to convert it to an as-fed formula, just so you know. That's it for this week.